Hey everyone, just a quick note before we start. Today's episode of Separate Bathrooms is a discussion of miscarriage. If this doesn't feel safe for you to listen to right now, you can take a break and join us again next week. If listening to this episode raises any issues for you, we've included links and phone numbers for the support in the description of this episode.
I think that the thing that does the most damage is actually the things that you shouldn't say, that people say. They try to put a silver lining on it. They try to minimize it. They try to, oh, don't worry, you've still got a living child. I mean, if a friend of yours, if one of their parents passed away, would you say, don't worry, you've still got another one?
Hello and welcome. We would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay our respects to elders both past and present. Welcome to Separate Bathrooms. My name's Daddo.
I'm Elle Daddo.
150,000 Australian families are affected by miscarriage every year. It's the most common pregnancy complication, yet it's surrounded by silence.
And our guest today wants to change that. Isabelle Oderberg has worked as a journalist for 2 decades in newsrooms across Europe, Asia and Australia. Her work has appeared in The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald, Guardian, ABC, Meanjin and elsewhere.
She's also written a book, Hard to Bear. It's Isabelle's first book, a groundbreaking investigation into miscarriage care, reproductive health and the inequalities in healthcare.
The book is the key to developing a roadmap to improving care for those who experience pregnancy loss and those who love them. Please welcome Isabelle into the bathroom. Welcome, Isabelle, to the bathroom. Great to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, indeed. Of course, we are here to talk to you about your incredible book. It's called Hard to Bear. It's really a brave book as you share your own experiences of miscarriage and those of other women and the people that love them. Thank you so much for writing this book. It's so powerful. And firstly, as someone who has also suffered from miscarriage, I wanted to say sorry to you for what you have been through as well. Are you okay to talk about your experiences of miscarriage as we go through this podcast?
Absolutely, and I'm sorry for your loss as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We'll go to the beginning of the book. There's a quote. If women were educated about miscarriage in school, then this wouldn't happen. The doctor said, gesturing towards me, all of me. You'd know miscarriage was just a normal, natural thing that's supposed to happen, and you wouldn't be crying about it. That was in the middle of your 6th miscarriage?
Yeah.
Shocking. Yeah. The guy must have got his bedside manner degree from the back of a Wheaties box. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think that if you look at it just in plain old black and white, there probably is some truth to what he was saying in a biological sense, but it completely ignores all of the cultural aspects of pregnancy, of loss, of mothering, of parenthood, of grief, and it was just a very simplistic way. And unfortunately, because miscarriage isn't talked about enough and it is sort of shrouded in silence, that's what you get. You get people totally misunderstanding it, not sure how to deal with it, not sure what to say, that this is a direct consequence. And if a doctor is like that, imagine someone operating outside of a medical field. It's just really challenging.
So was it this kind of interaction that was one of the precursors or that spurred you to write the book?
Yeah, definitely. There were a few things that happened that I go through a lot of them in the book, but definitely that was something that made me stop and think and go, well, is that true? Like, is it just normal? Is it natural? Is it, well, if it is, then why am I upset about it? And like, and as someone who's very much pro-choice, I was like, am I a hypocrite because I'm pro-choice, but I'm grieving this loss? Like, how does that fit into the equation? And I just had so many questions and so few answers. And so few answers that I could find, you know, when I started researching. So I set out to answer what I could by using the information that was already out there, but also to find my own answers by talking to a variety of different people from across the spectrum who've experienced it or been within a, you know, a close proximity to it in some sense.
Yeah, and you've done it so well, and it's so well researched. What was the process like for you revisiting those obviously extremely painful and emotional times and putting them to paper?
So the first thing I did when I decided that this was something I wanted to do was I actually hired a journalism graduate to go through all of my – so I let's say I procured a copy of my medical notes. And I was a little tricky, but I got them. And I then asked for the remainder from my doctor, and she gave them to me, Dr. Lovely, as she's called in the book.
Dr. Lovely, I love that,
Dr. Lovely. And I hired a young journalism graduate to go through and basically to put them all in a spreadsheet chronologically, all of my medical notes, so that I could see what happened when. My memory, I think, you know, trauma, there's been a lot written about how trauma can affect your memory and how you can block certain things out. And I was genuinely shocked how much I got wrong, just because I wasn't taking in information. And, you know, and being a journalist, like, I absolutely pride myself on, you know, taking in information. And so that was really confronting. And I do deal a lot with that in the book in terms of how trauma affects memory and why memorialization can be so important in those circumstances, if you choose to do it. But so I kind of started there and then worked through. So it was a really strange process. It was a process of dealing with the memories that I had, dealing with all the memories that I didn't have, if that makes sense, and then trying to put it all together so that I got a kind of cohesive picture of what had happened to me and how, you know, how all the puzzle pieces fit together. And it was really odd, I have to tell you. It felt like an out-of-body experience in a way. Yeah.
How long was that process? How long did it take you to write the book?
Well, it was a very extended period. So I had my living child, my second living child, in 2019, late in 2019, and decided, you know, I was going to write something. I didn't know at the time it was going to be a book. So I started reading. You know, you're on maternity leave, you're at home. I'm reading, and I'm like, oh no, oh bugger, it's a book. I don't want to write a book. I don't have the attention span for a book. Like, this isn't going to work. But the more I researched, the more I was like, whoa, there's so much here, you know, that needs to be unpacked. So I was very upset, and I went to my husband and I said, I don't want to write a book. And he said, well, you know, you don't have a choice. Like, you know that this is a book. So he said, just start writing. So I went to a few publishers. I got some pretty less than ideal responses to the idea of how I wanted to write it. One of them actually said, 7 pregnancy losses, that's depressing. I don't want to read about 7 pregnancy losses, and no one else does either. So that was interesting.
Did he go to the same school as the doctor that said?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, here's the kicker.
Have a cup of concrete.
The lack of empathy school, yeah.
I'll give you the kicker. It was a woman who has children. So it was interesting. It was a very interesting process. So it took about 6 months for me to have something that I was willing to show anyone. And by then we were in lockdown, right, because it was 2020. And then I found a literary agent, and she sort of forced me to sit down and write a full proposal. And it was, you know, incredibly difficult because it's there are so many topics and you want them to weave together, and, you know. And so it took all up, I think it took about 2.5 years from the time I started writing. Yeah, but I was lucky enough to get a grant from the Victorian Women's Trust, which was auspiced by Jean Hales for Women's Health, and that enabled me to actually stop working full-time and when my maternity leave finished, and actually focus on it and do it properly. I mean, I would have done it either way, but this way it didn't take me a decade, which was kind of nice. So
I saw that Jean Hales was involved in that. And that's so fantastic. I mean, they're so on the forefront of women's health. I just spoke to someone all about menopause with, from Jean Howes, and she was so insightful. It was really great. So how fabulous that she supported, or they, supported you through this. So you were writing the book and continuing to attempt to get pregnant as well, and you were still were you still having miscarriages as you were writing, or that?
No. So I made the decision, sorry, I should have been clearer about the timeline. I made the decision that I absolutely wouldn't write about it until I was finished my parenting or birthing journey, if you like.
Gotcha.
I felt weirdly superstitious, and I also felt that to do it justice, I needed to have a little bit of distance between, my journey and actually putting anything on paper, which is unlike me, because normally I'm really, impatient and I want to do everything yesterday. So it was a very deliberate, no. And I have so many friends who are journalists who are like, will you write about it? Because I was very open about my losses. And I said, no, I'm not ready. I'll be ready when the journey's over. Yeah. So I had my second living child, and then I started writing about 6 months later. Yeah.
And you ended up having your girl that you so desperately wanted, right? Oh, what's her name?
Her name is Roxy Rose.
Yes.
And I think it's funny because, that's probably the only part of the book that I read and I cry every time. It was a very, very when I found out, that I was having, that the baby was healthy and I was having a girl, that was pretty. It's still intense to read back.
Of course. Yeah, you have Royston and you have Roxy Rose and a stepdaughter as well. Your husband.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, beautiful.
I do.
Can I ask you, why do you think there is still silence around miscarriage?
So I think don't think it's just one thing. I think it's several things that I go through, in the book. But I would say the key issues are, as a society, we're not good with grief. We're just not. We don't know what to say. We don't know how to deal with it. We don't like discomfort, And I think that that's the first issue. The second issue is there's confusion. Is it a loss if it's a 10-week pregnancy? Is it a loss?
Yeah.
What do I say? Do I say I'm sorry for condolences? Do I say I'm sorry for your loss? Do I say what do I say? Is it a baby? Is it not a baby? How do I phrase it? And then I think also that there's just a real discomfort around issues to do with the health of people who have uteruses. I think there's just a general kind of hands-off kind of, I don't want to know about it, things like menstruation or menopause. We see all of these issues come up again and again where it's we don't talk about women's health or the health of people with uteruses and ovaries and everything else. And I think some of those just converge to create this terrible vacuum that leaves people who need support feeling even more isolated than they did already. And I'm not just talking about the people who are the birthing parents. I'm talking about the partners, the grandparents. There are a lot of people that feel huge trauma around this kind of loss,
Yeah. What support is out there currently for women, partners and loved ones?
Well, there definitely is support out there if you need it. There's Miscarriage Australia is a great website that I send a lot of people to, which includes, all of the service providers in terms of, grief counselling, but also a lot of research around the medical mechanics, if you like, around miscarriage, if you want to learn more and that kind of thing. Red Nose provides counselling. They do sort of, for want of a better word, birth to cradle all the way through. They're very well known for their stillbirth counselling, but they also do early loss. In fact, something like almost 35% of their referrals are for losses under 20 weeks.
Wow.
So it's actually a huge thing, a huge part of what they do. There are also a lot of support groups on Facebook, which aren't necessarily monitored or formal. They're what I call informal peer support, and I found them to be incredibly, incredibly useful. Yeah. Yeah, and I still have friends that I met in those groups. So,
really?
Yeah.
I remember reading a part in your book, though, that when you went to write about one of your miscarriages, like Facebook came in and said, "Oh no, you can't mention this on Facebook," and they didn't want you to. There was something that they didn't want you to talk about it. I
was I think that was the termination for medical reasons.
Right. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Where I mean, again, like when you talk about silence and miscarriage, like, it's even worse if you have a termination for medical reasons. So a termination for medical reasons is when there's a issue of genetics or developmental issue with either the baby or it's a risk to the life of the birthing parent. So it's a termination literally for a medical reason, not for choice, which, by the way, choice termination is absolutely fine as well. But this is quite specific, and you know, it's so my final loss, the baby had Down syndrome, and you know, I had the NIPT test that a lot of people listening, I'm sure, would be aware of it, which is a genetic testing, and that's where it came up. And there was no, I couldn't proceed with the pregnancy because the pregnancy was actually unviable. And, you know, I tried to get some support in the miscarriage support group that I was in, and they said, no, we don't discuss termination for medical reasons. I said, why? And they said, because some parents would be traumatized that you would choose to end your pregnancy. And I just thought, choose. What an interesting word in this circumstance to say that I'm choosing. I'm pregnant with a desperately wanted pregnancy that is actually unviable. Like, it's but, you know, grief does funny things and people react in different ways, and, you know, anyway, I had to go to another group to talk about that.
Yeah, because as you say, you never know what words, what experience is going to. Grief is a thing that you can't always track, and you can't always know what's going to set you off. So, you have to look after yourself first and foremost. Yeah, so,
and there is a definite sense of, like, you know, grief is not rational. It's incredibly, I mean, I remember, you know, after losses, I'd be walking down the street and I'd see like a heavily pregnant person, and I'd think, oh, they pity me. They're sticking their belly out more. They're, you know, it's not rational. Right. It's completely irrational. It's hormonal, and there's all of these things that are going through your mind and your body, and you know, obviously they weren't doing that, but the way that your mind plays tricks on you, you know.
I remember when, after one of our losses, we had a friend that had a baby that was probably about 8 months old, and I just could not be anywhere near her or the baby. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to hear about them. I just couldn't do it. And it was, you know, she was wanting to console me, but I was like, I actually can't do it. I can't see you, and I cannot see this baby. It was too, eventually you get there, of course. Yeah. But I remember that feeling vividly of just going, I cannot talk to Nicole. I can't do it.
I had a friend who reached out to me after, I don't even remember what number of loss it was, but it was after one of my losses, and she was having a baby shower, and she reached out and said, you know, there is absolutely no need for you to come if you're not up for it. If you're up for it, we would love to have you, but please don't feel pressured. And I said, you know what? I would like to not come. Thank you. And it was the kindest, most generous thing that she took a minute, even as she's celebrating her child, which, by the way, we celebrated that child much later, you know, together. But the fact that she'd taken a minute to be like, this isn't about me. It's not personal. She doesn't hate me. As in, like, sorry, I don't hate my friend. I'm not jealous of my friend. I can't do it right now. I didn't have the emotional bandwidth, you know? Because when you look at these pictures of babies, all you're thinking is that what my baby would look like? Is that what my baby would sound like? Is that what, you know, it's really difficult, but it's not personal. It's not a, you know, there are enough people that were going to that baby shower to celebrate that baby and my friend. But I think about it a lot. I think about her, and I think about the generosity of that phone call and how incredibly much it meant to me. Yeah.
Because that's the thing that I think that sometimes doctors, other people who've not gone through miscarriage, they don't understand that point of, like, as soon as you know you're pregnant, You've worked out the due date. You've taken them to school in your mind. They're married in your mind. I mean, there's so many milestones. You've created a life immediately in your heart, in your mind, and so yes, they might have just been small little cells, at whatever age, or whatever weeks that you may lose that baby at. But it's the end of like so much love and heartache and dreams that you put into that child. So it's never easy. It's never just, the earlier it is, the easier it is. It's not. As soon as you know you're pregnant, you are a mother to that baby.
Yeah, and I mean, you've said that beautifully, and I think that that's where the confusion lies, is that there is a sort of psychological thing called personification, and it's something that society has taught us to do. You must protect your baby. You don't eat sushi, right? You don't eat sushi. You don't eat runny eggs.
Right.
You don't, you must... or be looking at baby clothes, be looking at baby linen. People will often do a pregnancy announcement before 12 weeks or whenever with baby shoes, which is like, clothing is the ultimate tool of personification. So, and this all comes from a historical movement where we're trying to make women especially responsible for babies from the minute they're conceived. And to do that, we turn them into people, right? And so it's very difficult for someone who hasn't been pregnant to understand that while biologically it's a cluster of cells, to me, in my mind, I've already decided they're going to be a doctor. I'm Jewish. Like, you are going to be a doctor, right? Doctor or lawyer. That's it. You got two choices, and I already know what I'm going to call them, and I already know what color their eyes are going to be. And, so it's difficult, I think, but that's the point of the book. That's why I wanted to kind of explain it. And I think doing the research, especially around the psychology and why it happens the way it does, and also from me personally being someone who's so fervently pro-choice and I have attended abortion clinics with friends who've needed abortions, or and to understand the difference so that I could understand I'm actually not a hypocrite. There's a reason that there's grief there when it's a pregnancy that you want, and when you've created a human being in your mind, that already exists. A memory of someone who actually doesn't exist yet. I mean, that's ultimately what it is,
Yeah, absolutely.
When Ali and I were married, what was it, about 12 months, 18 months that you first got pregnant, that we lost the baby in America? The first one?
Something like that. Maybe a couple of years, but early on.
A couple of years. I remember feeling a bit, I was at a loss. I didn't know what to do, and obviously I've not been pregnant. And so I am that guy. But I know that there are women out there who don't have the bandwidth to use your word, to kind of deal with it as well, who've never been through who've had children and not had a miscarriage, so they don't understand it. And it was difficult. And then we went through a really, how long was that one? 17 weeks. Yeah, that was intense. And I was with Elle that time, holding her hand as they did she was conscious, doing a DNC.
I'm sorry.
Thing. Brutal.
I'm sorry.
Just like some antiquated kind of machine that belonged back in the 1700s, So it's, I'm just kind of making a comment of where I'm listening to you two talk, and I'm just going, oh my God, this is full on, and bringing back a lot of memories for me that were not happy. And also a bit more like, it was also, I didn't know what to do. I didn't really know how to care for Elle, but I do know that the one that I spoke, the last one, the 17-week one, that was when I figured out, that's when our marriage became really strong, because it was like, oh, now I know what it is to care for my partner. What support, can you take us through what support is out there for families and people going through it?
Well, I guess the number one thing I'd say is read my book, because I know that's self-serving, but this was not a vanity project. I aim to start a movement. I want things to change. I think there's a good chance that, that my children will see this issue in their lives, whether themselves or friends or family or whatever. And I am absolutely adamant that I need this system to be better. I'm starting a coalition of people who are interested in this area called the Early Pregnancy Loss Coalition, where we can start pushing for better funding for research, better funding for support services, all of those things, right? So, you know, and the other thing I'd say about this, my book, is that there's a really broad level, like it's really inclusive. I talk about access to care. I talk about the, you know, partners, whether you're male, female, non-binary, whether the birthing parent is, you know, non-binary, female, whatever. There's something in here for everyone. If medical misogyny and miscarriage and any of those things are of interest. Yeah. The second thing I'd say is that, you know, one of the big, I don't want to use the word problem, but one of the big challenges is that I think a lot of men, because of toxic masculinity and the way that society works, they think they have to be silent and stoic, right? In, you know, straight couples that are experiencing loss. And actually that does a lot of damage. So when you look at the psychology, the research in this area in psychology and the emotional fallout, often what happens is the male partner actually has as much trauma as the birthing parent, but they don't say anything because they're like, what my partner needs right now is for me to be really strong and stoic and support them, right? And so the birthing partner thinks he doesn't care, right? And this theme comes up over and over and over in the qualitative research. He doesn't care. And that is just, you know, obviously everyone's different, everyone reacts differently, but in the very, very vast majority of cases, it's not true. I think that I always recommend people keep the lines of communication open. You will find that when you are open about loss, you know, it affects 150,000 families a year. Chances are the person that you're talking to has been either directly or indirectly affected. Absolutely. Part of breaking the silence is just about talking about it, you know. And then there are also, like, there are resources that are very specific to certain demographics. And there's a great book by Aaron Gouvier, which I quote from in my book, which is specifically and only for male partners to understand, you know, and he wrote it with his wife. They had several losses and they found that really, really, you know, I read the whole book and it's a really good sort of two sides of the coin exploration of men in that situation and how they can process those feelings. Yeah.
Many women feel a lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment and feel like, you know, what's wrong with me? My body's broken. You know, this idea that we're female, we've got a uterus, pregnancy should be as easy as a walk in the park. And they feel like their bodies has let them down. Why is that? And how do we, more importantly, how do we change that for women who are absolutely, you know, I think your statistic was incredible about how many women have miscarriage across Australia per day. It was like 265 women a day are having miscarriages. So how do we change that? Every 5 minutes.
Yeah,
I mean, that's an incredible statistic.
It's huge. It's huge. It's a really, really big issue. And you know, that has been like bizarre how speaking about it, like everyone's like, I had one, or my sister had one, or my brother's wife had one, or, you know, it's bizarre. Like it is so widespread and we just, you know, do not talk about it. And I definitely feel like the blame, you know, blaming women or people with uteruses is something that almost every society in the world is really good at. You know, most society is a patriarchal, and I think that we come from a position of, if something went wrong, it must be my fault, right? Because I'm the woman and I'm supposed to be an earth mother and I'm supposed to be this amazing tigress and, you know, all the rest of it. And I think it's very, very clear that miscarriage to some extent is a normal and natural part of the fertility cycle, right? Not always, but a lot of the time. But because there's so much silence and a lack of education, people don't understand that. I mean, the number of times that I was told, you know, in subsequent pregnancies, like, just don't pick up anything heavy. Like, it doesn't cause miscarriage. Like, there's just so many myths and legends and, you know, and that's what happens when you have an information vacuum, is that kind of bullshit, for want of a better word, fills it. You know, that's what happens. So it's if we can you know, dismantle that and start sharing some of the real research. I mean, the other research that just I found staggering was that even after 4 miscarriages, for instance, you are still more likely than you're not to have a living child. You know, I mean, I had 1 miscarriage and I thought, I'm never going to have a baby again. You know, my one living child is my. I mean, there is so much information that just isn't given to people to make good informed decisions. You know, and that's why a lot of people have 1 miscarriage and then they're doing IVF, which is just you know, not something I would recommend unless you have a specific reason, you know, to be doing IVF.
In your research and discoveries, what is the male contribution to infertility and pregnancy loss? What did you discover there?
So it would not surprise
a lot.
No, it would not surprise you to know that in a situation where it takes 2 to tango, sperm quality is responsible for 50% or more of miscarriages.
Yeah.
Right? It's exactly what you think that it would be, given that it's a 50-50 proposition, really, realistically, right?
Yeah, but it's so left on the women's shoulders so often. It's like, oh, what's wrong with her? You know, what's going on with her body? And we don't hear enough about that side. Yeah.
So, and it's always, it's the age of the eggs. It's the age of the eggs. We know that sperm experience sperm fragmentation, you know, as the man gets older. I mean, but what's also quite interesting is that, you know, there are things that men can do to improve their sperm quality. How do I phrase this in a nice, neat package? The more sperm that is produced and disposed of, the higher the sperm quality gets in some situations, if I can put it like that. So basically, get to it, whether it's on your own or or with a friend. But, you know, not in all circumstances, but in some circumstances that can improve sperm quality. And not ever have I ever heard that actually told to a patient. You know, equally, I had 2 living pregnancies and 7 losses, and not once was my husband asked to give a sperm sample. Not once.
Whoa, that's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
And all those, and you saw 3 different doctors. Unfortunately, your first doctor passed away.
Yep. And
then you had Dr. Lovely, and then you had the superstar.
The cervical celebrity, as I call them in the book.
Yes. And none of them thought to test your husband.
Not
wow.
One. The assumption was that if I had a living child with my husband, that any of the really kind of dangerous genetic anomalies or whatever, we could rule them out because we'd had a living child. We did have blood tests before we decided to go for baby number 2, just for a screening procedure, and nothing came up. So no one ever said, you know, I wonder if sperm quality might be contributing to this scenario. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, my husband swears that it didn't, that he's absolutely confident. But you know, we'll never know for sure.
Yeah. You reference, which I think is really beautiful, you talk about your first living child pregnancy and your second living child pregnancy. How important is language around miscarriage?
Everyone's different, and it's really important because it kind of, how do I phrase it? It's a really interesting question. It can be, language is powerful, right? And saying that my angel babies and not my pregnancy tissue, it defines something. It defines for everyone around me that my angel babies were, to me, in fact, babies and not just pregnancy tissue. They were more than that. And, you know, I'm not talking about biologically, I'm talking about spiritually and emotionally. It's really important when you are trying to support someone who's had a loss that you take a cue from the language that they use. Not everyone is grief-stricken. Not everyone will use the word baby. Some people might find it traumatic to use the word baby. So if I say I lost my baby at 12 weeks, then I would expect the people around me to use the word baby. If I said I lost my pregnancy at 10 weeks, I would expect everyone around me to use the word pregnancy. It's a very good indicator of where that person is at. Yeah.
Well, that leads us to the next question. So I was going to say, what can loved ones say to a woman or a couple that have just suffered a pregnancy loss, and what not to say? So that's certainly, to take the cues from how the woman is talking about it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the simplest thing I always say is, I'm sorry for your loss. Always. That's all I say. And then I wait to have a response. So most people will say thank you. Some people will say, that's okay. I don't view it as a loss. I'm okay. I'm doing fine. To which I say, okay, that's absolutely fine, you know, and we talk about something else. It's really personal. And I think that the thing that does the most damage is actually the things that you shouldn't say, that people say. They try to put a silver lining on it. They try to minimize it. They try to, you know, oh, don't worry, you've still got a living child. I mean, if one of your, if a friend of yours, if one of their parents passed away, would you say, don't worry, you've still got another one? Like, what is that? You know, like it's just not a thing you say, you know. And if you're nervous, the simple thing to do is say, I'm sorry for your loss, and then shut the hell up and listen, because maybe they want to talk about it. Or, you know, what can I do? They might say, you know, look, could you take, if they've got a living child, you know, can you take my living child to the playground for 2 hours? I just need to cry in private. Or they might say, absolutely nothing, I'm fine. Do you want to have brekkie tomorrow?
Yeah.
But ask them, just say, what do you need? What can I do for you?
Yeah.
You know, the same way you would with anyone else who's had a form of grief appear in their life, you know?
Yeah, as you say, when people minimize it, I always found, you know, and I think this is super common, and I understand why people are saying it. They're trying to look for that silver lining, but that thing, well, clearly there was something wrong, which was why you lost the baby. So isn't that the good news? It's like, it's not good news.
How do you know?
There is no good news.
But did you do a DNA test? Like, how do you know? Like what, and also like, does that mean I shouldn't have wanted the baby? Or like, it's just, it's disappointing. And I think I'm glad that people seem so interested in that aspect of the book, like what to say and what not to say, because I really do want to help. But I think less is more, and allowing the other person to talk and say what they need is really, really important, you know. But really the other thing is, sometimes life's a shit sandwich, and you're allowed to say that. I'm really sorry. Life is such a shit sandwich sometimes, and that's it. And sometimes that's all people want to hear. I'm just really sorry, you know?
Yeah, that's right.
Just to acknowledge what's actually happening.
Yeah. And not go, I'm not going to try and put a positive spin on you losing a baby that you really wanted to add to your family, you know?
No.
So
it's such a common thing though, where people, I'm going to say blokes want to fix stuff, and we want to make things better, and you want to leave the room in a positive way, and or finish the conversation with a positive button. I'm guilty of that, totally. You know, leave them with a laugh or something. But I just love that you just go, leave it, keep it simple, stupid, and just, you know, is there anything I can do? Is there anything that you need? You know, I think it's brilliant.
And it's interesting because I read this study it was quite a big study, and I reference it in the book, but men often had a lot of confusion the men surveyed in this study around, you know, when they were told, oh, your partner's having a miscarriage, they said, well, fix it. Like, fix it. Like, give her a tablet or, like, do a procedure. Like, just fix it. And they were really confronted by the fact that it couldn't be fixed.
Yeah.
And it certainly is some sort of mindset thing where they just expected medical technology to be able to fix it, you know. So, you know.
Well, you've given some great advice to men to keep their pipes working, you know, keep everything flowing. So that's some good news for fellas out there. It's permission to do that. Don't need to go any further.
It was just an example.
Just an example.
Oh, no, he's going to take that and run with it, even though we're not having any more children. Apparently, that's another reason for Cam to visit the bathroom on his own.
That's
half your luck. Go for it.
Thanks, hun. Taking it right to the sperm bank. Hey, so after something, after there's been a miscarriage, how do you get physically and probably more importantly, mentally and spiritually ready to conceive again?
So that's like really, really personal. Yeah. I was like, I just locked a door. It was like almost you could hear the door slam in my brain, like that loss is over. Let's go. Let's get pregnant again. And, after my first loss, my doctor at the time said you need to wait 2 cycles. I did everything to try and get myself pregnant with my husband. I was like tricking him. I was, did everything I could possibly do to try and get him in bed and get me pregnant. And he was like, no, the doctor said 2 cycles. I mean, but I just needed to try again and get back on the horse quickly. It really depends on, your own mental state. Like there are people who are, who have maybe shaky mental health going in and they might need longer to kind of get their head back together. Some people go through a miscarriage and say, I'm never ever going to be pregnant again. They just go, that's it for me, I'm done. I think that they'd be, I suspect, in the minority, but it does happen. I think that that it's physically, there's a lot depends on the gestation of the loss, whether you've had a D&C or a D&E. There are a whole lot of factors that play in. Yeah. But I think the only message that I would give is beyond doctor's advice, which I am not a doctor. I emphasize I'm Jewish. Sometimes I say I'm a doctor. I'm definitely not a doctor, only to friends and family. Yeah. But I am actually not medically qualified to give medical advice. Really, the one thing I would say to you is beyond medical advice about when you are physically safe to try again if you've, say, had a surgical procedure or anything like that, only you know when you're ready.
Yeah.
Only you know. You have to make the decision and your partner has to respect it because, and equally, you may be ready and your partner might not. And it's very important that you are both, or vice versa. But everyone has to be ready and everyone has to be prepared, because just because you have a loss and you go into a second pregnancy doesn't mean you're not going to have another one. It does happen, unfortunately. It does.
Yep.
So you need to be really ready. And pregnancy after loss comes with a whole lot of other challenges.
Yeah.
I have been left with a pretty impressive anxiety disorder as a result of having 7 losses. I had what I would describe as sort of, pretty much like your standard neuroses and anxiety, not requiring any sort of medical intervention. And I now have to take anti-anxiety medication because things don't always work out the way I want them to. And that's been a big learning curve for me. So pregnancy after loss really does come with a lot of challenges, or can come, doesn't always, can come with a lot of challenges. But what's really interesting, I'll just add one other related point in, which is there is a theory called the TLC theory, tender loving care theory, and multiple studies have shown that people who are given psychological support, additional scans, and regular appointments with their doctor in subsequent pregnancies are more likely to have a positive, a living child, positive pregnancy without adverse outcomes. So, I find that really fascinating. And I was talking to a highly, highly renowned professor in the UK. It was very scary, called Dame Professor Leslie Regan. And I said, you're such a person of science. You're it's all about research but you believe in TLC. And she said, the research shows that it works. And I said, well, why? Why do you think? And she said, I'm not sure. But she said, don't you think if everyone was just a little bit kinder, the world would just be a better place? And I just was like, this woman of science, like it was a kind of a magical moment.
Yeah.
In the writing of the book.
I mean, it makes, I mean, of course you say it and you go, well, of course that's what we need. Of course that's what women partners need in a tragic loss like that. Because, and I would imagine, you know, a grief counselor, because again, it's the end of a dream. And if you want to get pregnant again, to work with the anxiety of that, because I remember that vividly of like, every day waking up, am I going to lose this baby? Am I going to lose this baby? You know, well, what does that mean? What does this, I've bled now. And, you know, and you have your breakthrough bleeds and think that's a miscarriage. And it's, you know, and you've been through it even more so. So to get that support and just to I mean, we're huge proponents of therapists. And I know I had a therapist for me that was there for me, helping me through it as well, as did Cam. So to not be afraid to ask for that kind of support, you know. I guess it's not like you've lost a 2-year-old, but you've lost so many other things in that. So to seek that kind of support, and TLC, I mean, that's like the best.
Yeah. It's a magic idea. And I mean, obviously I do have some ideas of biologically there are things to do with hormones and stuff, but it really is, it's wonderful. It's like a wonderful kind of, you know, story to take away and put into our lives. Like things go better if we're just kinder to each other, you know?
Absolutely.
We hear that a lot. We talk to a lot of different people, and I would say that kindness is the one through line that we have in living a successful life as a human, is to be kind. And it's great. And you've been very kind with your time today. You've been very kind to write this book.
Absolutely.
And the book is hard to bear. Isabelle Oderberg, thank you so much for joining us today in the bathroom. It's been great.
Thank you so much for having me and for the support for the book. And, you know, I really hope it helps the people that it needs to help.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Thank you for being so vulnerable with your story as well, and sharing so much of yourself. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's a book that I hope many, many, many people read. This is an important one. Even if it's not you that's had a miscarriage, but maybe someone you know, or getting ready to, if someone you know, because the chances are you'll come across someone in your lifetime that may have gone through miscarriage. And with this book, you'll have the full understanding, you'll know the words to say, and you'll be able to support that person. Yep. I have nothing more to add to that. That's pretty well put. Pretty well put. Because, like, I think one of the really important parts of this book is how to deal with someone that's just been through it. You know, how to speak to them. And because it's a lot of, I know that I have often struggled with how do I talk to someone who's been through that. What are the words? Like we've often spoken there where you've given me the script of what you want me to say to you, you know, in certain situations, and it's really helped out. And you cover that in your book. But having this in this book around this subject of miscarriage is really important. Yeah, it's absolutely great. She's actually really brave. Yeah, really brave writing. Yeah, about a topic that has been too long kept under the. Really well researched. It's got all sorts of issues that she tackles, and Hard to Bear by Isabelle Oderberg. So thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next Separate Bathrooms. There you go. Till soon. Bye.